Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thank you guys for being here as always. And it is 3:45 in the morning. I am freshly showered after my shift at work, and I also just finished Star Wars Last Shot. So, let's do a quick spoiler-free review. Yes, this will be a spoiler-free review because, well, I don't expect everybody to be able to get through the book within the first 24 hours of it releasing. So, we're just going to talk about the general feel that I got from the story, the overall quality of the story, how well it delivered the story that it was trying to tell, as well as just basic formatting and what my first impressions are and whether or not you should go ahead and consume this before you actually go and see Solo, A Star Wars Story on May 25th. So this book kind of operates on this very interesting dynamic where you have the main story, at least to me it felt like the main story is this story that's taking place post Return of the Jedi involving Han and Lando and a couple of other characters. Meanwhile, that main story is being informed by, I don't want to say flashbacks, but sort of shifts, tonal shifts over to other stories. These other two stories is a story in between Solo and Chewbacca and Staros, a character from the comics, taking place a few years after Solo, A Star Wars Story. And the other side story is Lando and L3 a few years before Solo, A Star Wars Story. So I think we're going to talk about the two individual stories first, and then we'll move into the main story. The story that didn't work for me as well as I wanted it to is, surprisingly, the Solo, Chewbacca, and Staros story that takes place just after Solo, A Star Wars Story. Because I don't know why. I think it has something to do with the fact that I already know the character of Han Solo in canon. I already know how that character would react to certain situations, especially a slightly younger character who, in theory, has gone through something trying during the actual movie that takes place a few years previously. And so there's no real tangible challenge for him. There's no intrigue, especially, about how is he going to react to this sort of thing. It's still a younger Han who's slightly more optimistic, but he's been beaten down by his first run-in with the criminal underworld and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of already know how that character is going to react. There are tons of fun little bits in it, but it didn't resonate with me as much as I personally would have liked it to. But that's really the only downside that I have to this book. The other side story between Lando and L3, which, again, I also only just listened to the audiobook of this, so I've not actually been able to count. Okay, there's 43 pages of Lando story and 75 pages of Solo story and then 100 and whatever pages of the main story that has both of them in it. It's just a feeling that I get, and just kind of how I felt and how much time I felt passed, how much time the actual book spent telling each story. And that is that the Lando story is probably the shortest of the three different time periods that this book explores. And that kind of disappoints me because there's tons of great stuff with Lando, and especially there's tons of great stuff with the new droid character L3. This story has some really fun intrigue and kind of how does this fit in and how does that fit in, whereas the Solo story just kind of felt like almost a distraction. It was, oh, okay, we're going to go back to this for a chapter or two. Okay. That I felt when listening to that Solo story. So, on to the main story. The main story is actually really, really fantastic. It reminded me a lot of a lot of the Legends post Return of the Jedi stories. This story takes place 3 years post Return of the Jedi, 2 years post Battle of Jakku. So Ben Solo is 2 years old, and we get to see a ton of character development for the character of Solo, Han Solo, and a ton of character development for the character of Lando Calrissian. Follows this sort of Legends sort of story structure playbook, is that, you know, in the Thrawn trilogy, in the X-Wing books, in the Thrawn duology, in the Jedi Academy trilogy, in the even the new Jedi Order stuff, it's usually something strange is afoot in the galaxy, and our heroes must figure out what it is. And then they find out that it's this big conspiracy or this big plot or this big, huge deal that they need to deal with, and then they deal with it. In my opinion, this main story is better than most of the post-Return of the Jedi Han Solo that we got during Legends, and at least to me, way better than any of the post-Return of the Jedi stuff that we got with Lando back during the pre-Disney era. The Legends version of post-Return of the Jedi Lando is very much a static character. He doesn't really grow all that much. He doesn't change all that much. He's just, I'm the smooth talker. I'm the more polite version of Han Solo. Whereas in this, he has a ton of challenges that he has to deal with, both internally and externally. And you get this feeling of a character really growing. And the character of Lando has always kind of felt a tiny bit two-dimensional to me. He's just, I'm the suave, more polite, more cultured version of Han Solo. Still a scoundrel, but much more cultured and all that. But this book especially has really delved into that character of Lando. This book actually, to me, feels like it's more of a Lando story, a Lando book, than it is a Han Solo book. With that being said, we still get a ton of great character development for the character of Han Solo. We get to see him facing a ton of different challenges, again, internally and externally. It just feels like the character development that we got with Lando is a little bit more, how do I put this? A little bit more visceral, a little bit more out of the blue, I suppose, is probably the best term, because the things that we experience in this book with Han, it's kind of like, yeah, that would make sense. That would be an issue for Han, and this would be an issue for Han, and that would be an issue for Han, and etc., etc., etc. Whereas the challenges that are facing Lando during that time period feel more intriguing, because I don't know how the character is going to react to that, or how the character of Lando will react to certain stimuli, I suppose, certain events happening around him, certain character moments happening around him. Now, with that out of the way, should you read/listen to this book before you go and see Solo? That's a difficult question to answer. The bottom line is that this story will give you hints, or at least to me, I feel like it gives me hints. I don't know what happens in Solo, a Star Wars story, obviously, but I feel like it does give me certain hints to what might happen to this character and what might happen to this character and how this character's interaction with this character is going to work out, because you do note certain characters that are absent or not absent during that post-Return of the Jedi era, or rather, and not just physically absent or not absent, but are they being talked about? Are they being thought about? How are they being thought about? You're going to get these sort of hints and these sort of feelings that will, at least for me, give you this sort of feeling of, okay, I think I know how this character is going to go in the movie, and I think I know how that character is going to go in the movie. It doesn't outright spoil anything. It just, to me, I feel like I got some really strong hints as to what might happen to certain characters within the movie. So if you want to avoid that, if you want to go into Solo totally blind, do so. do not read this. I really heavily suggest, bottom line is, I heavily suggest listening/reading to this, because you're going to, you're going to always get this sort of, with anything post Return of the Jedi, you're going to feel more connected to the world. You're going to start seeing those story strands that are connecting the original trilogy to the sequel trilogy, very much so like how Bloodline did for the character of Leia and for the overall political situation of that time period in the galaxy far, far away. And you get the same sort of sense, but on a much more personal level from this book. So this is definitely, at least for me, a must read for heavily involved Star Wars fans. It's just figuring out whether or not you want to get into it before you see Solo. So, that being said, if you guys read it, leave your spoiler-free reactions to it down in the comments down below. As always, thank you guys for watching. If you're not already, hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed this video. If it was helpful for you, hit that like button too. It lets me know that I'm doing something right. You can find links to my Twitter, my Twitch, and the podcast that I co-host down in the description down below. Thank you guys as always. And as always, may the Force be with you. Take care.